Can I move this a little bit, please? Thank you. So here, no, he left. Yes.
Okay.
I think we can start, and when he connects again, we can.
Thank you.
Don't worry.
Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. We are already beyond all of our time, so we can start. So we are in the parallel session 3.2 within the parallel session 3 under the panel 3.2. That is focused on biodiversity loss, poverty, and global inequality, links and trade-offs. 5 people were selected to present their respective papers, and I invite them to come when I call each name. So we have Ivan Borja. Yes, please. Ivan Borja holds a PhD in international development and a master's in agriculture economics, both from Texas A&M University. Actually, Ivan is a professor at Ana G. Mendez University and senior independent consultant in development issues. Previously, he collaborated with San Francisco, the Quito University, Grupo Faro at UNTP. The second selected person is Hajar Kratu. Hajar Kratu is an economist. She got her PhD in 2015 from the University of Auvergne, Clermont, France. Dr. Hajar has worked in Prince Mohammed bin Fahd University, KSA, for 2 years as assistant professor in economics, and recently she joined Adman University in UAE as a researcher leading the economic research group and as academician teaching in the Department of Finance. The third person is Pablo Gonzalez Moctezuma. She holds also a PhD candidate. She is a PhD candidate at University of British Columbia. He holds a master's in rural development management from the Universidad Autónoma Chapingo, with specialization in family agriculture and food security. Founder and director of Proyecto Cool, collaborated with EA Hombre Sobre la Tierra and the regional bioslurry and biogas program in the Yucatan, developing small-scale biodigester for fertilizer and biogas. The fourth person who the paper was selected, Bernard Clerinomo Peyala. I don't know if he's there or because he's not online also. Bernard Nomo is an assistant researcher and a lecturer in economics at the University of Yaoundé, Cameroon. And the last one, Pousseni Bakwan, he is online. You can see already him. Dr. Pousseni Bakwan holds a PhD in applied economics from the Norbert Zungu University. He is assistant in macroeconomics at the Virtual University of Burkina Faso, and his research focuses on macroeconomics. So they are our 5 presenters today. We can start the presentation following the order in the agenda, but if we we have a little bit an issue for Puseni. Puseni, can you hear us? If not, you can start immediately with Pablo Gonzalez for his presentation on trade-offs between addressing biodiversity loss, poverty, and forest cover loss, so rise in large-scale restoration initiative with agroforestry systems, insights from 450,000 farms in Mexico. The floor is yours, Pablo Gonzalez. You have each of you have 10 minutes for presentation, and we are going to unchain the four presentations, and after that we will do the question and the answers. So the floor is yours. I don't know if there is a mic with you already. Please. You can be here.
I can go there?
Yes.
Okay, or maybe here to point to the...
Hay que poner la presentación, ¿no? Hay que ver cuál es la presentación.
I'll go
que
there.
nos diga. What is your
I'll
presentation?
leave the microphone.
Primero.
Sí.
Yeah.
El pointer. Láser. ¿Cómo lo paso? That's the presentation. ¿Lo paso aquí? Láser.
Ya le veo.
Perfecto.
Compartir. Ahí está la compartición.
Ponerle, pero vale.
Ay, perdón. Modo. Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Yeah. You can hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this panel. I summarized the title of my presentation. So now it's called Large-Scale Agroforestation Trade-offs Between Poverty, Biodiversity, and Forest Loss in Mexico. I'm going to try to take out the microphone. You hear me better like that, maybe. Yeah? This is a work I've developed with my advisor of my PhD called Janine Remtula. I'm part of the Landscapes and Livelihoods Lab in the Faculty of Forestry at UBC, Canada. I come from the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam people in Vancouver, Canada. My university has the campus right there, and I am very, very thankful for the support from GDN and from the people of Quito for having me and welcoming me in this land. I'm quickly introducing myself. I am from the southern Mexico, Oaxaca, an agricultural region. I studied mathematics and rural development, and I've also been a practitioner for more than 7 years, doing restoration and rainwater collection systems. And after that, I came to do my PhD in Vancouver, Canada, for the last 4 years. As you might know, we are currently in an era that we could call the era of restoration. We are in the decade of ecosystem restoration, according to the United Nations, and we also have very big initiatives to plant trees all across the globe. The Bond Challenge is attempting to plant 350 million hectares of land by 2030, and we have commitments for restoration that are even larger than the current agricultural land in the entire country. So restoration is coming big, and it's coming quickly. These are the countries that have big commitments for restoration in blue and in yellow, and you can see that a big part of the world has commitments, including Ecuador, including Mexico, and probably many of your countries. Canada should be here. The map is outdated, and that's why we don't see Canada there. Yeah? This is too loud, maybe, yeah? Good? I hear it very strong. Okay. Forest landscape restoration initiatives aspire to meet multiple goals. As we've seen here, when we restore, when we plant trees, we want to do many things by planting trees. We want to sequester carbon, we want to increase forest cover, we want to protect biodiversity, and we want to bring benefits to communities, among many other objectives. But these multiple goals are hard to attain at the same time. And when I came to do my PhD, my big question was, how is restoration going to happen in Mexico? How are the different complexities and cultural characteristics of Mexico going to affect how we restore the land in Mexico? And this is a program in which this particular part of my research is based, which is called Sembrando Vida. This program is a federal program by the federal government that started in 2019 and has enrolled almost 450,000 families. That is 500,000 families. It is a lot of people, more than 3 or 4 million people, because the families have more than one people, right? And they are paying around $250 per month per family from the month families are recruited until 2024 in the exchange of planting 2.5 hectares of agroforestry systems. So very simple. You get a transfer every month of $250. You as a family commit to plant trees, agroforestry systems, so trees and crops in 2.5 hectares of land. That has to be very clear for me to continue. The program had three main objectives. Taking people out of poverty, tackling deforestation, so reducing the pace of reforestation, and also restore areas for the importance of biodiversity, which we've seen very much in this conference. And my questions are, to what extent the program did attain its three objectives, at least theoretically, because we don't have data on the program. The government has denied any access to researchers to the program. So we don't really have data from the government. We have to do all sorts of tricks to get the data. And then the other question is, would it be possible to achieve the three objectives simultaneously? So we have three objectives, very quickly: poverty, deforestation, and biodiversity priorities. And we want to know whether we're going to attain the three objectives and can we do it simultaneously at the same time. To answer the first question, I have to show you the map of Mexico. The United States would be here, Guatemala and Belize would be here. The map of Mexico and where people were recruited in Mexico. Darker areas mean more people recruited, and lighter blue means less people. These states in gray are not participating, so they do not have people. One of the big learnings that or findings that we got from studying this map: the poorer regions of Mexico get proportionally more funds. What does this mean? What does it mean? That after 4 years of implementation of the program, almost, if you add these two orange bars, this is the first cycle of recruitment, 2019-2020, and this is the 21-2022. After the recruitment was over in 2022, almost 16% of the rural population of Mexico had access to the program. That is huge. Mexico is a very big country, and this was a huge program. The downside of this is that even though if you were poor, you were more likely to get the program, most of the money ended up in the hands of people that were not in poor areas, but in rich areas. You can see here that poverty level, blue is not very poor, and orange is very poor. So this is an artifact of the cause that blue areas have larger populations. We used a model in order to understand to what extent the three different objectives were covered, and we can see that this model, if I show you the graph, what I want you to focus on is that we have that middle line, and if you're to the right of that middle line, it means that the areas where the government put the money are actually the areas that have the highest poverty or the higher absolute forest cover loss, etc. Right? So you address the objective, you match the objective if your circle is to the right and blue, and you don't match the objective if you are either in the middle line or to the left. For poverty, we can see that the government actually reached poor areas. For forest cover loss, 75% of the beneficiaries, roughly, are located in areas that have high forest cover loss. So the program actually achieved the goal of reaching areas of high forest cover loss. But then when we see biodiversity restoration priority, which is the most important for this conference, we see that actually, instead of going to biodiversity areas, the program ended up in areas that are not very biodiverse. Is it possible, though, to go to areas that are at the same time biodiverse, losing forest, and poor? Well, to do that, I have to explain you this map. This map, it has 2,500 municipalities in Mexico, and if the municipality has high biodiversity priority, then it's colored in pink. If the municipality has a lot of forest lost, it's covered in green, it's colored in green. And if it has both of them, then you get colored in blue. So the areas that have a lot of forest cover loss and biodiversity priority are the ones in blue. Let's make it a little bit more complicated. I'm going to overlay on this map circles. If I put a big circle on top of the municipality, that means that that municipality is not very poor. If I don't put anything on it, that means that it is poor. When I cover it like that, we get a complicated pattern to read, which is those municipalities that are at the same time poor, losing a lot of forest and very biodiverse. It's hard to say whether there is a lot of area or not. So I just simplified the map for you. And here we can see what are the areas that are actually that are actually very biodiverse, very poor, and losing forest very quickly. And we can see that they are all scattered around Mexico, and they might be a little bit tiny. So to discuss, Sembrando Vida reached poor areas with high levels of forest cover loss. We address those two objectives from the perspective of the policy. There's no clear signal of prioritizing wild biodiversity. We didn't get to the areas that have biodiversity naturally, in a way, wild, because it's not managed by humans directly. But the funny thing is that the plots might be very biodiverse. From what we've heard here, if they are agroforestry plots and people bring a wide range of species, it might be very biodiverse. And the program might be bringing biodiversity into the plots. And the third thing is that it is technically possible to maximize all the objectives. Had the program arrived only to these municipalities, then we would have the most poor people that have a lot of forest cover loss and also biodiversity priorities. However, and this is more on a trade-offs note because that's the name of the session, the trade-offs are las negociaciones que hay que hacer. The trade-offs are that large-scale restoration initiatives have to deploy very quickly if they're managed by a government, which is pretty complicated, and that imply loosening selection criteria. You want scale, you want to go quickly, then you might have to recruit people that are not exactly the type of profile that you're looking for. The second trade-off is that getting to the poorest families might not be efficient without including other economic groups. The transaction cost of getting to the poorest of the poorest, it's too high for a government level program. Well, we see it here, and it's also known in the literature, in the scientific literature, that it happens very, very often, that you get to the poor, but you also have to give to the rich, sometimes in this case, more than what you gave to the poor. Each additional objective increases the planning complexity. When I showed you this map, like this, you're like, oh, well, there is a lot of blue, right? But when you overlay poverty, it's like, oh my God, there's almost nothing, right? So every objective you add to your policies or to your projects makes it even more complicated to attain. And the last trade-off that I want to speak about is that agroforestry projects are versatile. They're very sexy because you get all the benefits of the trees and of the crops and the diversity, but they also require a very long time to be planned and monitored. And this, I'm telling you, as a practitioner that was doing agroforestry plots for 5 years, it's pretty complicated in the end. thank you very much for your attention, and I want to pass the microphone to the chair. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pablo Gonzalez, for this presentation. Let's move to the second presentation with Hajar Kratou from Tunisia. The title of her paper is How Does Biodiversity Loss Increase Income Inequality? The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes for presentation.
Show to me how did you use the light?
The arrows.
Not the arrows, the arrows. The arrows and
This trigger
okay.
and the arrows here.
Okay, thank you. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this session. Thanks for being interested to income inequality, poverty, as well as biodiversity. Thanks for GDN. Honestly, it's a pleasure to be back after last time. It was 2015 in Casablanca. That year, I defended my PhD in development economics. And currently, I'm working in academia in United Arab Emirates in Ajman University. I'm from Tunisia, Tunis, North Africa. So this is a research paper about how does biodiversity affect income inequality. The study covers a sample of developing countries. These are the outline of our presentation. All right, in the introduction, I would emphasize on the intuition behind studying the effect of biodiversity on income inequality. One covering environmental question, the other one is more socioeconomic question. But our reference is the so-called United Nations Development Program for eradicating poverty, preserving environment, the more commonly known 17 SDGs that had been implemented 2015. The most important target here is target 9 from SDG number 15 that talk about hard biodiversity loss. So we cannot reduce income inequality, we cannot tackle poverty without or ignoring the biodiversity loss. So this is a very important starting point. In the literature, we can see that in order to pay attention to vulnerable people, people in need, we have to provide policies that should be universal at the political, socio-economic, and environmental side. People who are highly sensitive from climate change consequences are probably people who are located in forests, in tropical areas, and of which their sole source of income is mainly coming from farming, agriculture activities. So our research question is, how does biodiversity loss affect income inequality? And we hypothesize that this relationship should happen through 2 channels of transmission. Biodiversity loss would probably have impact on price level or inflation. This is hypothesis number 2. In hypothesis number 1, it would probably affect the household consumption. It would make it more fluctuate and less stable. All right, so the most recent paper regarding biodiversity, such as Stammerer and Habel-Serreter, are among those who claim that deforestation is a major cause of loss of biodiversity. Conventional agriculture, monoculture, and the conversion of previously unused forests into farmland led to the drastic extinction of species. So the human intervention is the main cause of all these biodiversity loss. Another important statistic from FAO that show that in developing countries, there is about 11% of deterioration of forest area due to human intervention. In this study, we are going to show to you more serious statistic from our sample. Yeah, the second point from literature review, yes, discuss that really we need to pay attention to poor and vulnerable people, since you can see that most of them in their employment activity, their agricultural production, they really need to, we really need to pay attention to them because they are mostly sensitive to climate consequences, and probably they are mostly probable to lose their income, which make the income inequality to be more widened. All right, it's a little bit technical, but I will try to simplify things. So in order to test our hypothesis, we use both stylized facts, figures, statistics, and also econometric model. All right, so this econometric model, it's very simple. We are trying to explain the income inequality. To explain this dependent variable, we are going to use a set of variables. We are going to control for socioeconomic, demographic, political variables, because income inequality does not only depend on biodiversity, but also on other sources. We use a set of biodiversity proxies in the study. For example, level of water stress, crop production index, droughts, floods, and extreme temperature, and forest area. Our two channels is the inflation rate. The other variable, which is the consumption volatility, it's a standard deviation. Standard deviation, it's a statistic measure. It could be done even with any statistical software or even Excel. It shows the fluctuation or going up and down the movement of one variable from its average. And this is really an indicator that shows the variable is not stable and it's going up and down. And this is related to household consumption per capita growth. We use an econometric technique, which is the two-way fixed effect. It is highly used in social science because it enables controlling within and between variation in terms of countries. This is our sample, which include 60 developing countries coming from 6 regions, as you can see. Our purpose is to include a maximum of developing regions, but later we are going to emphasize, as Pablo mentioned, the data issue. The study period is 1995 till 2019. All right, from our stylized facts, we can see that countries covered in our sample lost around 3% of forest area during 25 years. This statistic changed from one region to another. In the left-hand side, Central and Latin America lost around 6% of their forest area during the same time period. However, we can stay optimistic. Some efforts had been shown in other regions, such as East Europe and Central Asia. And this could be due to the fact that policymakers, governors or governments are taking things seriously and are reacting accordingly. More seriously, our data show that in the case of sub-Saharan Africa, things are going in the bad side or are worsening, I can say. For instance, Ivory Coast had lost more than 50% of their forest area during the same time. Malawi, 31%. Tanzania, 17%. In the same vein, and staying in sub-Saharan Africa, which looks to have more remarkable outcomes, I can say, Algeria and Egypt are the two largest countries in the north of Africa. It's true that they have a huge side of Sahara, but statistics show that less than 1% is the proportion of their land that is devoted to forest area. In another stream, our stylized facts here show the correlation between the proportion of population that had been affected by droughts, floods, extreme temperature, and the other variable is the income inequality. This is a scatter plot and put a correlation between any two variables simply if you have the data. So these scatter plots show to us that the higher the number of population that had been affected by droughts, floods, extreme temperature, the high is the income inequality. How can we explain this? Droughts, floods probably are extreme temperature that affect production of agriculture. Farmers, people who are working in agriculture can lose their entire crop production. These put a pressure on the supply would be lost. And at the same time, extreme temperature would require more demand for people. So in terms of demand supply, there is a pressure on price. Extreme temperature, such as heat, could lead to fire. And this is what happened in Mediterranean areas this summer and last summer. So this would lead that people can lose their household, can incur some further extra financial loss. It could affect their health, specifically elderly people that cannot resist to such a temperature. So all of this would lead to a financial loss among these vulnerable population, and this would increase the income gap inside one population. All right. These are some of our empirical results. The proxy that we use here for biodiversity loss is the level of water stress or intensity. It's clear that it is associated with a positive and significant effect on income inequality. It's well known that the level of water stress, it reflects a high intensity of using water. And this would lead to a loss of sustainability of natural resources and would lead to a loss of economic development. However, when we interacted the variable with our channel of transmission, we can see that the only time the result is meaningful is through the household consumption volatility. What does it mean? Which means that when vulnerable people, when we can satisfy their need in terms of water, this at some extent would limit their volatility and would reduce their income inequality. And this refers also to, we can see access to fresh, safe, and affordable water of all households, which is also recognized in another target, 6.1 of the UN SDG program, satisfying the need of household consumption, mainly the vulnerable ones who suffer from budget limit, is crucial to close the gap of income inequality. For the other channel, the result was not significant. So we are not going to interpret it. Okay. In this slide, we discuss another proxy of biodiversity, which is crop production index. The intuition behind using this index is the fact that we are experiencing food crisis. At the same time, it looks that the problem keep prevail for the simple reason that the population growth is keep growing. So there is a need to pay attention to this crop production index, which reflect the income from agriculture. And this is at some extent very important variables to limit famine and to assure food security. And we had been attending a set of presentations during the conference that had been emphasizing on the question of food security. So our results here show from this proxy that, yeah, this is the negative result, just to show to you that the results show a significant and negative coefficient for both channels. Contrary to the first one, it was only one. So this indicates that when farmer income from crop production is relatively stable, this would enable to put down both the consumption volatility and the price level, and in turn, this mitigate the income inequality. When the crop production is stable, so there is no need to put pressure on prices because the supply will not be under pressure compared to the demand. I'm talking from economist side. At the same time, the consumption and stability or volatility will not be at stake. These also align with a set of targets from the UN SDG program, such as target 2.345, that are recommending about doubling agricultural productivity, paying more attention to family farmer, implement more resilient agriculture practices, paying more attention to the adaptation to climate change and extreme weather. So it's, you know, a long set of recommendations, but all of them led to the same implications, I can say. All right, before presenting the policy implications, just want to debrief you about the limitation of this study. And I think the limitation is not exclusive to this study. Most of social science are struggling from the problem of data, as Pablo mentioned, specifically data about developing regions. For instance, here our attempt is to cover more biodiversity proxies. For instance, the proxy about ocean quality, about marine area, but we hadn't been able to find data for developing regions. And even if data is available, it will be for short time. All right. So these are our policy implications. In the morning, Jo, the lady that had been presenting on Zoom, she said that we come to a critical time, critical situation. This is true. So I think we can catch up. We can catch up in a way that we can raise the sensitivity of policymakers, of international community to change our practices, to be more aware about what is happening, and we can see what is happening. Like every month there is climate shock event happening, or even in September, we already had a lot of disaster in North Africa. So policymakers need to urge their action to implement more green behavior, to go more for sustainable agricultural strategies, to call for conservative agriculture, to forego the conventional one, and to have a better warning system about short-run prices elasticity. So these are some of a huge set of recommendations, but I think that are feasible and also possible. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Hajar. You went over time allowed for you, but we don't have the one person for the presentation, so we can be flexible. Now we invite Ivan Borja from Ecuador to present his paper on reconciling conservation and well-being, the case of Ecuador. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. And like my previous colleagues, I thank GDN and all of the staff that have us to be here today. Well, my research is related to some of the issues that my colleagues also have talked before about regeneration and conservation in Ecuador, and how those issues are related with the well-being of the population. Well, like Gonzalo mentioned before, the loss of natural forests is a world problem. All of the nations since several years ago are aware of that, and Ecuador is not an exception about that. Just in the case of Ecuador, we have lost more than 2 million hectares of forest since 1990. Also, there are two important moments in the history of Ecuador about forests. Before 2016, the country have a decrease in the net rate of deforestation. There was a balance between the rate of deforestation and what was happening with regeneration. However, since 2016, the rate of forest regeneration has decreased, so the net rate of deforestation has increased. And that's something that we have seen right now during the last 7 years. There are several efforts, both at the national and the international level, to help to keep the forest and to promote regeneration of the forest in the country. Some of those, like is RED with the United Nations. Gonzalo mentioned about the Bond Challenge, the Global Partnership on Forest and Landscape Restoration. And also, Ecuador has a similar program that was mentioned in Mexico that is named Sociobosque Program. Yeah, it's like a Forest Partners project, something like that. What was the purpose of all of these programs? To halt deforestation and promote sustainable use of the forest resources in the country. We have 4 objectives for this research. Maybe I will focus in the 2 that are more important for the study. The first one, objective for us was to know about what were the drivers of deforestation and regeneration in the border areas, in the more critical areas of deforestation in the country. And we wanted to have the perspective of the producers and the farmers on those regions. And the second one, objective that was very important for us, was to determine the potential to manage secondary forests as a source of income and sustainability for these areas in the country. Some ideas about where we run this study and what was our methodology. We identified 4 zones or 4 areas in the country where deforestation was more critical. Like you can see in the map of Ecuador, these 4 spots are the yellow ones. These were located in the coast of Ecuador, in the north, close to the border to Colombia. The name of this municipality is Quinindé. And the other 3 areas were determined in the Amazonas region. In the north region, in Lago Agrio, another one in the central region, Tena is the name of the municipality, and the last one in the south, close to the border with Peru, it's named Zamora. So these were the 4 areas where we ran the study. What we did, where we review a lot of documents and the lead available at that point of time. We ran interviews with producers and public officers, and we proposed at the end of the study some strategies based on the data that we collected. We analyzed this data, and we ran some workshops with the key stakeholders to identify what are the potential and possible strategies to face this challenge for the country. Talking about the producers that we interviewed, those were 94 producers. They used to work with cocoa, palm oil, and livestock in these 4 areas. And also, other thing of the research project. They ran 12 forest inventories that they were conducted in secondary forests ranging from 8 to 33 years in age, with a total of 70 transects in the 4 areas. What we find during the study? Well, we divide our results into parts. The first part that I am discussing right now is what is one of the main drivers of deforestation. And like we could suppose, agriculture was that drivers. What we found, I will discuss briefly, because of the time, some of the main reasons or some of the main impacts that this driver has in the process of deforestation and regeneration in these 4 critical areas. The first, the agriculture and livestock production in these areas depends mostly, or is affected mostly, of the international and national markets. They define a lot the decisions of the producers. In the case of cocoa and palm oil, those depends of the international market. And in the case of the livestock in Ecuador is mostly for national consumption. So the internal price is that one which defines what is the pressure in the border areas of forest for these producers. Something that is very important in these areas, that these areas show very low production levels. Those levels of production or the yields that these areas have are very low compared with other areas in the country. So it reflects the fragile of the soils that we have in these areas close to the forest. Another important finding that we got is that even when economic factors was the first of the main driver of deforestation and regeneration in the country, there were several important factors in the making decision process of the producers. And this came from some technical, social, economic, and institutional factors that could promote or not promote the expansion of the agriculture frontier in the country. Like we could expect, like we mentioned before also, low yields promote deforestation. Something that is very important in these areas is that the culture and the traditions of these communities impact the decisions that the producers take. As positive factors, we found that diversification of agricultural products and also when the farmers belong to COPs, those are factors that stop deforestation and promote regeneration, because they don't feel that pressure of market price on just one crop or just one activity to expand the agriculture frontier. And also when they are part of cooperatives, they get more support, financial support, technical support with activities of the cooperatives that increase the yields in the areas. Other important factors also that we found during the study were the levels of technological change. Like we could expect, with more technological change, less pressure in the borders and vice versa. The expansion of productive areas depends on all of the factors that we have mentioned before. Also, the legal framework is very important. There are several areas that the owners of the land, they don't have, we used to call here escrituras, or they don't have the regular paperwork that accreditates that they own the land. So that is another very important issue. In some cases, we found an important quantity of farms that were abandoned by the farmers. There is no a specific reason for that. It's not like the case in Colombia, for example, that when in Colombia there were the problems with drugs and guerrilla, that motivates some people to leave their homes and their farms. Here in Ecuador, we were not able to identify just one criteria for the reason of that. One of the reasons related to with this driver was the low yields at some point of time motivates people to leave the farms and look for another sources of income. However, that was not the only one reason to leave the farms. we could see that farmers are aware of the environmental problems that represents being in the border of the forest and pressuring the forest to increase the agriculture frontier. And also there are some demographic changes that affects the rates of deforestation and regeneration in these areas. The other objective that we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation is the importance of secondary forest dynamics and their characteristics as a source of income and well-being in the population of Ecuadorians in the border areas of the forest. What we found, well, when the forest inventories were run, we found that there exists high levels of floristic diversity within this forest. For example, we found an average of 275 tree species with more than 3 centimeters diameter and breast height. That was very important if we think about what is the economic potential of these secondary forests as a source of income for the populations. And that's something that we mentioned later in the presentation. In terms of commercial species, the participation of these species increased with forest age. We found a lot of forests with more than 20 years old that have more than half of the extension with commercial, species to produce. What else? The productivity, the participation of commercial tree species and natural regeneration dynamics are promising in these areas that we research and show a good potential for the communities that live there. Finally, our model estimated that the net income per hectare that will be around $50 per hectare. However, the work day rate that these people could get from working in their own forest is about $60 to $80 per day. So that's something very important because even when the economic yield per hectare is low compared to other activities like cocoa and palm oil, however, if we are thinking about communities that don't have enough resources to invest in their plantations, however, they could extract in a sustainable way forests from these areas, the income that they could get from those areas per day is very competitive with other economic activities. Well, because of time, I will go maybe to the last part. Some important conclusions that we got about the production systems. Farmers realize that there exists important pressure on the forest, and they show their willingness and available to learn and improve the productivity on their farms. Also, they recognize that the low productivity is associated with the quality of the soils and the plants and the genetics of the animals that they belongs. And also, they identify that there exists several programs for the international cooperation and from the national government that could be very useful for them. However, these programs are not spread all around the country. So that is a very, that's an important barrier to access to those programs. The intervention strategy should aim on the one hand to diversify production. For example, in the case of the Amazonas area, we have what is called chakra, and something like Gonzalo mentioned that this is some kind of agroforestry production system that provides more sustainability to those areas. And some conclusions on the potential of managing secondary forests as a source of income. Like we mentioned before, we found that secondary forests in Ecuador have an important potential to generate and produce income for the families who depends on that. However, there is no experience on the farmers managing this kind of forests, and that is a very important barrier to promote the sustainability of those areas. Even when there is a high regeneration potential, a great biological diversity, and interesting participation of commercial species in this forest. While the integration of no timber forest production products production and payments for environmental services growing in popularity here in the country, timber production still have a very important role in the play of conservation of natural forests through their sustainable use. Well, I think I will stop there, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Ivan. Now we are trying to enter the fourth person who is presenting online. Husseini, can you hear us?
Yes. Hello.
Okay.
Good evening.
So
Hello?
wait, so
Hello?
yes, yeah, we can hear you. Just a few minutes to change the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah. Listo, que pueda compartir. Ya, listo.
Sorry for me. Good evening, dear Luciano, esteemed participant of prestigious conference. I'm Husseini Bakwan, Associate Professor and Coordinator of Department of Economy and Management at Virtual University of Burkina Faso. I'm happy to be with you tonight to share my find of my paper titled Bio-Trade and Inequality, that's Frontier Technology Readiness. The presentation is structured around 4 points: paper motivation, data and methodology, result and policy implication. Our paper is principally motivated by 3 key factors. The first factor is increasing global inequality and the significant disparate inequality among different regions. The second factor is a presence of a positive correlation between bio-trade and inequality. The first factor is the controversy surround the result of theoretical and empirical work on the impact of international trade. Given this observation and the exceptional nature of biodiversity products, we seek to explore the impact of their trade on inequality and the potential role of frontier technology readiness. To address this question, we empirically assess the impact of bio-trade on inequality in 131 countries. Our data were sourced for database. We employ the instrumental variable method to estimate the impact of bio-trade on inequality. The main result of our result are: the first result, basically estimation overall indicate and biotrade increase inequality on the global scale. The two results, to test the robustness of our findings, you employ an alternative estimate technique, the instrumental variable method. The result confirm our preview conclusion that biotrade increase inequality worldwide. The result 3, furthermore, we subject our finding to additional analysis. We replace of Gini index with alternative measure of inequality. The result consistently supported that biotrade increase income inequality. The result 4, we explain the finding. We examine the role of different components of technological innovation. Among the components of technological innovation, we use the internet and research and development stand out in mitigate the accelerated impact of biotrade on inequality. They findings support the thesis that technological innovation serve as a mechanism to transmit the effect of biotrade on inequality. The result first, finally, we assessed the impact of biotrade on inequality by region. Our results vary from one region to another. Will biotrade increase income inequality in Latin America and Caribbean, as well as in East Asia and the Pacific? It significantly reduced them in South Sahara Africa and South Asia. Policy implication. The findings call upon policymakers to formulate inclusive policy for promote the biotrade with a focus on assurance universal internet access and increasing investment in the research and development. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Puseni. You have respected your time. Now, please, to question and answer, because a few times remaining for us to the discussion, and I think due to the limitation of the time for the presentation, we will have other time to discuss and to complete the presentation. So the floor is for the assistants for the question.
Una pregunta en español, más fácil. ¿Cuál creen que es cuál creen ustedes que es la razón para que los fondos, tal vez gubernamentales o externos, no lleguen tan efectivamente a las áreas pobres? ¿En qué se pierde el dinero? Al menos de las experiencias de Ecuador y de México, se ve que realmente ha habido esfuerzos interesantes para hacer un cambio, ¿no? Y con fondos bastante buenos, pero algo se pierde en el camino. ¿Cuáles podrían identificar ustedes que son esas causas?
I will respond in Spanglish and Spanglish para just to make sure we all get. So Sembrando Vida, right? The program I studied, el programa Sembrando Vida. They were afraid of corruption in Mexico. There was a lot of corruption. Hay mucha corrupción en Mexico. So they say, we're not going to, I don't know, maybe well, I'll try to do it very quickly. They don't want corruption, no quieren corrupción. So what they do is they transfer from the federal government to the farmer. No intermediary, right? Quitaron a todos los intermediarios, transferencias directas. In a way, that makes the money go directly into the field. The program costs $1 billion every year in transfers to farmers and around $1 billion in operations. Programa Sembrando Vida transfiere $1 millones de dólares a productores y $1 millones de dólares cuesta la operación del programa. 50% losses, we could say, right, in terms of operation. It's not bad. There's a big critique about the program undermining. El programa está menoscabando estructuras sociales que existían. There were preceding ejidos and other land tenures that are not being in use by the program. So that's a big critique, just to put two sides of the same coin.
Thank you. Well, in Spanish also. En el caso de Ecuador hay dos factores adicionales. El uno es del tema de propiedad de la tierra. Si hablamos de la experiencia nacional con el programa Socio Bosque, si el posesionario de la tierra no tiene escrituras o no es propietario, no puede acceder al programa. Y la segunda razón es, Socio Bosque ha sido un programa relativamente exitoso en el país, pero es la sostenibilidad de recursos para mantenerlo. Entonces, de igual manera, en Socio Bosque vemos dos etapas. Una etapa relativamente exitosa hasta 2017, 2020, y posterior a eso, un decaimiento bastante importante en el número de participantes del programa, debido a la escasez de fondos gubernamentales.
I think your question is related to the money laws. Yeah. Here it's basically when vulnerable people of which they have one source of income. Basically, this source would come from farming activities. When we have, climate change shocks, those people are the most affected by these events. In many ways, it could be that they are going to lose their agricultural production, like here we took the crop production. Probably their housing would be damaged. Probably that they are going to be touched by heat, by floods. All of this would affect them in different ways. It could be in terms of health. It could be in terms of demanding more food or more health service, or it could be also that their production is lost. And all of this would require from them to get some buffer. economically buffer, it means that you hold some reserve. But those people, generally speaking, they don't have reserve. They are living the day per day, you know. So, and most of them are unbanked that they don't have access to a bank account. They cannot have, even some of them, they cannot even hold an ID. And this happened in a lot of regions in sub-Saharan Africa, in a lot of developing regions. So probably most of them, they are going to pay some of their financial, if they have this reserve, in order to repay for housing, or in order to get some health service, or in order to, you know, to make some restoration of what they lost. It could be also a small business. And here we mentioned in the recommendation that those farmers, specifically small families or poor families, are the most affected by this. So these money loss would probably come that they are going to pay that reserve that they hold, if really they hold this. Yeah, I hope that I answered your question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mickey from the World Bank with the Poverty and Equity team. So I have a question for Pablo. So the program is hard to say if it actually causes the reduction in poverty because the rollout of the program is non-random. Is there a way for us to think about it and test to make sure that it's actually the program that leads to a reduction in poverty with some sort of methodology? And then for Hajer, I was wondering if your intuition of using, I think the crop index and the water stress test as a proxy for biodiversity loss. Why, I guess my question is whether you were considering using other weather variables as well, because you discussing earlier in your presentation about using drought, extreme heat, and all those kind of like disasters, extreme weather events.
All right, I would start with the second question, and I emphasized on the problem of data, and I'm sharing the same point as Pablo. Yeah, so our intuition is to include a maximum of biodiversity proxies. The number or the proportion of people concerned or that incurred loss due to extreme temperature had been used only in the stylized facts, if you remember that scatter plot. However, we cannot include this variable in the model because it was only provided for a short time, or for technical reason, econometric models require more observation and more data information. And as I mentioned in the slide of limitation, our intuition was to include a maximum of variable. For example, there is a variable about marine land quality, about life below water, about the quality of ocean. But this is concretely, this is a problem, and I think this is a barrier. And I think you are coming from the World Bank. My data that I used in this study is coming from the World Development Indicators from the World Bank. And I know that the World Bank are conducting a lot of efforts with FAO, with other organizations. But here, the problem that for developing regions, there is no data. Like if you look to the website and you can find the variables, but for developing regions. And I think this is a barrier for social science, not only for this paper. For your first question, why we use crop production index, we believe that biodiversity loss and climate shocks are inexorably linked. So one of the consequences of climate shocks would affect people or agriculture or farmers of which their activity depends on weather and on, you know, this climate variation. Probably one of the consequences is that it would affect their production because the variable is defined according to the World Bank, the World Development Indicators. is the sum of agriculture production income. So when we have a biodiversity, due to the fact that there is extreme temperature, droughts, or floods, probably that these people are the first one that they are going to be incurred. And it is strongly related to the question of consumption volatility. When the farmer is going to lose his production, probably that the entire supply in the economy would be less. And if we talk in terms of demand supply, if the demand continue to raise due to this food and security, at the same time supply is going to shift to the left side because there is a shortage, probably this would affect the price level, this would affect inflation. This is our hypothesis. This is how we fixed our second hypothesis. So yeah, we see that the variable is crucial. And as I highlighted in the introduction of these variables, that due to what we are experiencing now, this food and security, it is like a vicious circle. Everything is interconnected. So, and I think if we start tackling with the first issue, we will be probably able to resolve each consecutive one. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to add a little bit about this measuring biodiversity. In Mexico, we're very fortunate to have the Commission on Biodiversity, which is a ministry that actually measures and protects biodiversity. Mexico is not a poor country. We have poverty, but we're not a poor country. And we can afford having a commission with great scientists measuring biodiversity. I showed a restoration for biodiversity index, which is the areas that we should be restoring if we want to increase biodiversity in Mexico. We also have one about conservation of biodiversity that are very biodiverse. And that's just to give an example of how rich the data is in non-poor countries, but in poor countries, there's nothing. There is very little data. So you have that challenge. And I was very fortunate to have good data. I'm going to speak to the poverty problem because it's big. For Sembrando Vida, it turned out to be one of the biggest problems. Poverty was the main objective of the program, reducing poverty. And the first year, what they said is, we're going to recruit only poor people. How do you do that? You have around 50,000 extensionists, people looking after the farmers, that were collecting data on whether people are poor or not. First big challenge, how do you ask someone if they're poor or not? Second big challenge, these people collected 5 million households of data, and they sent it to the Secretaría de Bienestar, the ministry that it's administering Sembrando Vida. And they just got a database of 6 million entries on poverty, completely incompatible, needing cleaning, needing everything, and they were deploying the program already. It was a complete failure. They couldn't process that data. So what they did is that they dumped that strategy and they told the technicians, recruit whoever you can. Just get as many people as possible into the program. So this speaks to how do we assess whether we got to the poorest or not? Well, in the first place, it would be ideal to have this type of baseline data that Sembrando Vida attempted to get. But it's impossible for a ministry that doesn't have the technical capacity to design the surveys and to deploy that kind of data collection exercise to do it. So we ended up assessing poverty by region. So what I'm doing here is just exactly what they did, because that's the data we have compatible with the program, which is whether you went to the regions that have more poverty in terms of proportion, right? There's rich people in those regions too, but I mean rich not, but well-off people. But you have to do it regionally because we don't have the capacity to manage that data. And this is just, I think, a call for funding organizations and also scientists to make a better effort at digitizing and using the technology of information that we have right now in order to be more efficient and more capable in these efforts to collect, for example, poverty data or other types of data. poverty is kind of sensitive though, because you're also tapping into certain questions that are more difficult than some others, right? Or of whether you have 3 hectares or 5 hectares of land. That's, you know, no problem. That would be my answer. Okay.
Thank you, and great presentations, by the way. I'm from India, and again, a question we have been discussing about incentivizing indigenous communities or those who are poor to, you know, secure biodiversity. But what in India, what we have seen is incentives work till the incentives are going. Is there any sort of regulations where if I am committing my land under this program to, you know, whatever 2.5 hectare or 5 hectare or whatever, but when the program ends from the Mexican government, my land is my asset. And if because I'm poor, it's easier for me to just sell it to somebody and, you know, get the money and leave. How do we stop that? How do we stop the land acquisition from the rich people to develop their businesses from the poor people once the, you know, the program or the resources are tapered down by the government?
We can take the 2 questions and after that, because the time is very, very limited. Yeah.
Buenas tardes con todos. Mi pregunta es, desde su experiencia, ¿cómo podemos introducir este tipo de programas en una política para un Estado? Para el Estado, como tomarle como una política pública que dé eficiencia con resultados.
Thank you. I have a question for Poussini. Poussini, bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
All right. I'm sorry, my question is technical, but I have to ask Poussini. You have used an econometric technique, which is the instrumental variable technique.
Yes.
I was expecting that you explain what's the source of endogeneity. I guess that this is the main reason, but what is exactly the main source? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. If you take my paper, source of endogeneity provided by biotrade. I regress biotrade comme instrument population and excuse me. I can speak. I can speak French.
Yes, because Ajer.
I can speak French.
More, yeah, French. Okay.
Ok, très bien. Merci beaucoup pour ta question. Hein. Alors, l'endogénéité vient de là parce que nous régressons biotrade sur les inégalités de revenus. Mais ce que nous considérons comme nous détectons dans l'endogénéité, c'est que nous utilisons la population ainsi que le fait qu'un pays soit assez à la mer ou pas. Hein. Le fait qu'un pays soit assez à la mer, c'est une variable avec laquelle nous utilisons la population comme donc des éléments déterminants donc du biotrade, du commerce, voilà, de la biodiversité sur les inégalités de revenus. Alors, je voulais aussi poser des questions aussi par rapport à votre papier. parce que vous avez utilisé effectivement les 12 mètres carrés, mais malheureusement, j'ai pas vu les textes qui validaient donc les instruments. Et surtout même les tests d'endogénéité, je n'ai pas aussi vu. Mais je voulais aussi vous recommander d'utiliser des indicateurs alternatifs, de mesure dans des inégalités pour tester vos résultats, que je trouve très intéressant à mon avis, quoi. Si vous voulez, on peut partager les contacts et puis on va échanger davantage parce que je travaille beaucoup sur ces questions. J'ai beaucoup d'intérêt pour ça. Merci beaucoup.
Yeah, it's okay. Time is already over, but I think we have two questions remaining for response. Yeah, Pablo, please.
A quick reminder: how do we stop land acquisition and land grabbing, and then how do we deploy these kind of policies that we were talking about into a state policy? Land acquisition. Well, I have to say, many of these plots of Sembrando Vida are in a different land tenure that it's not private property. In Mexico, we have 4 types of land tenure. One of them is private property, but more than half of the country is on the ejido tenure, which is a communal property right. So you organize an assembly or a group of people, and those people own the land collectively, and they make their arrangements collectively. That land is not sellable. It's not for sale. And that protects a lot of communities from selling. After a bad hangover, people can just get crazy and sell their land. But in this case, they need the consensus of the whole community in order to sell. And then they have to go through a lot of paperwork if they want to do it. So I think alternative land tenures could be something that could work. Obviously, if you have a successful land policy that is giving you good agroforestry plots for a long period of time, you're not going to sell that land, even if it is in private property. So now I'm segueing into the next question, which is, how do we turn this into a public policy? I do not think that our Latin American governments are capable of deploying this kind of policies for a long time, because we have government transitions every 6 years, and agroforestry plots need 10 years to mature. If you really want to get a stable produce, you need time, and the transitions between governments are not allowing that. So I think it would be a better idea to tap into these biodiversity credits, forest carbon credits, etc. I actually could give you a couple of examples of private companies that are actually granting long periods of financing to farmers so that they can deploy successful agroforestry projects. So I don't think we are in a stage of governance maturity in Latin America to be able to deploy this as a government policy. That would be my take.
Briefly, the second question about the public policy. I believe in the case of Ecuador, the country has an appropriate public policy about the environment. However, maybe the 2 problems that I see is, one is what Pablo mentioned right now, is that we don't have that governments that doesn't have that long-term vision about how those public policies should be put in place in the country. So we have one government, another government, and even when the lobby is set up, they don't follow previous plans that are important for the country. And the second one is with implementation of the public policy. Even when the public policy is written in the paper, there is no enough support to implement those programs, like the case of Sociobosque program that I mentioned before. Even when the program achieved one of the most important public policies in the country about the environment, it's a program that depends of the government on office. And that complicates everything, the process of implementation of the public policy. Thank you.
So it ends our session today. Many thanks to Ivan, Pablo, Ajar, and Pusini for their brilliant presentations. And also, thank you so much for the assistance, for your active participation during the session. It means that the topic today was very interesting for all of us. Thank you so much.